Once dubbed the most beautiful woman ever, Louise Brooks was a trailblazer of the silent cinema and style icon of the jazz age. Her sharp, modern look and provocative self-confidence made her adored by millions, but her uncompromising attitude and unwillingness to bow down to studio moguls led to friction even at the height of her fame. How did a little girl from Kansas rise to global stardom, then fall so low she had to earn her crust as a paid escort, and then rise again to reinvent herself as a writer and commentator on all that she had lived through in the hedonistic heyday of Hollywood? Welcome to Insane History. I'm Professor Graham Yorston, and today we'll be exploring the life of the mesmerising Louise Brooks, her meteoric rise, her unglamorous fall, and her re-emergence from the wilderness. I have to confess, I've long been a fan of Louise Brooks. I had a picture of her on my wall at college. I didn't really know much about her then, but there was something captivating, haunting, and in a way slightly unnerving about those eyes as they looked down at me as I sat over my books late into the night. Louise Brooks was born in 1906 in Cherryvale, Kansas, which is described as a typical Midwestern community where the inhabitants prayed in the parlour and got up to no good in the barn. Her father was a lawyer who was interested in the arts but often preoccupied with business, and her mother, Myra Rood, an accomplished pianist who declared that any squalling brats she produced would have to take care of themselves. In her memoirs, Louise describes a far from idyllic childhood, with emotional neglect and from the age of 9 the unwelcome interest of a neighbourhood man who liked taking children to the cinema and buying them sweets, and the rest. It was an era when such things were not talked about, and when she told her mother, she suggested that it must have been her own fault for leading him on. The pain and shame of this trauma stayed with her and had a damaging psychological impact on her self-image and ability to sustain relationships. She shut out the memories for years, but reflecting in life later, said that it had made her incapable of real love, as nice, soft, easy men were never enough. As an escape, she started dance lessons and showed early talent. At 15, she enrolled at the prestigious Denishorn School in New York. But after only a couple of months, she joined the touring company and performed all over the States and in the theatres of London and Paris. In her second season, she was promoted to a starring role, but this didn't last long as a row broke out and she was promptly fired because she was thought to be getting too big for her 17-year-old boots. A friend got her a job as a chorus girl in a Broadway revue, but after 3 months of this, on a sudden whim, she went to London, where she found work dancing at a fashionable nightclub, and is said to have introduced the Charleston to an astonished audience. She was soon mixing with the famous bright young things, but was unimpressed, commenting later that by New York standards they were a moribund bunch, and that his book about them, Evelyn Waugh, must have been a genius to create a masterpiece out of such glum material. Although not so well known now, the Bright Young Things are a group of young rebellious aristocrats, archetypes and socialites who scandalised 1920s London with their flamboyant clothes, wild parties and pushing of boundaries. It says a lot about the kind of life that Louise had been living, that even though still only 18, she found them dull. Bored with London, she returned to New York, but was soon treading the boards again in a Ziegfeld musical, but still not headlining. She had a confident, devil-may-care attitude that got her into trouble at times, and she frequently skipped work to attend parties organised by her flapper friends. When she appeared as a scantily clad specialist dancer in the 1925 production of the Ziegfeld Follies, she began to attract the attention of critics and movie producers. One of these was the improbably named Walter Wanger, a producer at Paramount Pictures who was instantly infatuated. He got her a bit part in The Street of Forgotten Men, and although it was an uncredited role, there was something about her magnetic presence that had the bosses at MGM and Paramount competing to sign her up. Wanger, who was already in a turbulent relationship with her, advised her to sign with MGM, arguing that if she chose Paramount, everyone would assume that she had got the job through her connections and talents in areas other than acting. But incensed by his line of reasoning, interpreting it as a put-down of her actual acting ability, she completely ignored him and signed with Paramount, even though it offered less money. Over the next few years, she played the female lead in a string of light comedies made at the Astoria Studios. In between, she found the time to have a passionate 2-month affair with Charlie Chaplin, who was in New York for the premiere of The Gold Rush, and just about the hottest property in the film world at the time. With her newfound fame, she tried to prevent the publication of revealing shots of her by taking the photographer to court. She freely admitted the pictures had been a necessity in order to climb the theatrical ladder, but said,
"I intend to be married eventually, and what do you suppose my husband would say if every time he picks up a newspaper or walks up Broadway, he is confronted with a photograph of his wife clad in only a lacy shawl?"
In 1926, she did marry Eddie Sutherland, the director of one of her films, but the couple were often in the newspapers with their glamorous lifestyle and stormy relationship. And within a year, she had met George Marshall, owner of a chain of laundries and future owner of the Washington Redskins. Describing this as the most fateful encounter of my life, she abandoned Sutherland, who was devastated. In 1927, she moved to Hollywood and made 4 further pictures with Paramount, including the early talkie Beggars of Life, considered her best American film. In California, she found a new set of the rich and famous to socialize with, and was a frequent house guest at the extravagant castle of William Randolph Hearst, where she is said to have had a romantic liaison with Pepe Lederer. Such relationships were of course still very much taboo in the 1920s. But Brooks had a reputation for being alternative, as she had been friends with a Follies dancer who, according to Brooks, seduced more chorus girls than Ziegfeld and Hearst combined. Speaking later about her reputation, she said,
"I had nothing against it in principle, and for years I thought it was fun to encourage the idea. But I only loved men."
Brooks was never particularly keen on Hollywood, feeling that the studio executives had too much power and that they stifled artistic freedom. So when she was denied a promised raise by Paramount, she simply walked away. Not many Hollywood stars were able to do this, and I think it says a lot about her personality, her attitude to the film industry, and to life in general, that she was able to say no. It's not important enough for me to compromise. I'll do my own thing, thank you very much. It was at this point that George Marshall persuaded her to go to Europe with him to try her luck in Berlin. The German film industry was Hollywood's only serious rival at this time, and G.W. Pabst, one of its major directors. He had been planning a film version of Pandora's Box, an unsettling tale of obsessive desire, for some time, but needed a believable Lulu. He had already rejected Marlene Dietrich as too knowing, but Brooks's mixture of impish innocence and smouldering sensuality was perfect. Her decision to abandon Europe and embrace the edginess and uncertainty of Europe is undoubtedly what secured her place in the pantheon of silent film greats. She made a second film with Pabst, the even darker Diary of a Lost Girl, in which she portrays another complex and controversial character who defies societal norms. I watched these films again recently, and although it takes a while to adjust to the slower pace, there is a brooding intensity and power about them that draws you in, and Brooks's performance are mesmerising. Anybody who hasn't seen them, I'd wholeheartedly recommend finding a DVD copy or watching them on YouTube. Brooks said that Pabst knew instinctively that she was Lulu, and that he just turned her loose on set. But off set, he was always a little bit mad at her, taking drinks out of her hand and making sure she wasn't out partying all night long. After the film was finished, she went with him to Paris to discuss another project. But at a restaurant she behaved, in her own words, rather outrageously, slapping one of the dinner guests across the face with a bunch of roses and drawing blood. Pabst was horrified and hustled her outside and back to the hotel, where she
decided to banish his disgust by giving one of the best performances of my career.
A shocked Catholic priest once asked Brooks how she felt playing a sinner like Lulu.
I felt fine. It all seemed perfectly normal to me. I knew 2 millionaire publishers, much like shown in the film, who backed shows to keep themselves well supplied with Lulus.
As Louise's fame grew, so too did the pressure that came with being in the public eye. She struggled with the expectations placed on her, and although regarded as one of the most beautiful women in the world, she would go to a party and think she was the ugliest one there. Her anxiety, insecurity, and fondness for cocktails and late nights led to her developing a reputation for being difficult on set. Despite the success of her German films, she made only one more European picture before returning to New York in late 1929. It was at this point, when she was at the height of her fame, that her career began its precipitous decline. She went to Hollywood to discuss signing with Columbia, but when Harry Cohen, the head of the studio, left her in no doubt what would be expected of her if she wanted decent parts, as he did later with so many other actresses, including Marilyn Monroe, Brooks declined his lecherous advances and the promised contract never materialised. She was offered a lead role in Warner Brothers' classic gangster movie The Public Enemy opposite James Cagney, but she turned it down and the role was given instead to Jean Harlow. This was effectively the end of her film career. She later claimed she declined the role because she hated Hollywood, but others have suggested she just wasn't interested anymore. She made a further one or two minor films, but by 1932 she was broke and declared bankruptcy. Although Marshall repeatedly asked her to marry him, she always refused, and in the end he came to the conclusion that she was incapable of being faithful and married someone else. In 1933 she married Deering Davis, a Chicago millionaire, but walked out on him after only 5 months without so much as a goodbye. She spent a year dancing in nightclubs, but the monotony of cabaret routine bored her. She attempted a film comeback in 1936 and had a bit part in Empty Saddles. She even accepted a humiliating, uncredited appearance as a ballerina in the chorus of a musical as she needed the money. But her refusal to lie down on the casting couch meant that she made her final film in 1938, a John Wayne Western in which she was barely recognisable from a decade before.
What? I didn't know there was any in this town.
Then I guess you haven't heard the news.
And that was it. Her career was over. She was 32. What next? In 1940, she was living in a cheap apartment in West Hollywood, working as a copywriter for a magazine. But when that job fell through, she packed her bags and went home to her father in Kansas. But this turned out to be another kind of hell, and she packed again and returned to New York. For several years, she worked as a salesgirl in Saks Fifth Avenue store and cultivated a select group of wealthy gentleman friends. But eventually, they too lost interest and she signed on with an escort agency. Contemplating her new life and how far she had fallen, she said she
began to flirt with the fancies related to little bottles filled with yellow sleeping pills.
All of her rich and famous former friends forgot her, and she lived in poverty and obscurity. Angry at this rejection, she started writing a tell-all memoir, but in the end, she consigned it to an incinerator. It wasn't looking good for the once celebrated actress, desperate for money and dependent on the bottle for whatever temporary reliefs alcohol could provide. But then, in 1955, at the age of 49, she was rediscovered by film historians and proclaimed a legend. The following year, James Card, film curator for the George Eastman Museum, found her living as a recluse in New York and persuaded her to move the 300 miles north to Rochester to be near the museum's film collection and library, where she could study cinema history and write about her past career. With his encouragement, she started writing witty and perceptive essays on cinema for film magazines, not out of bitterness and regret, but out of acceptance and understanding. This was the fallen star's rise from the depths, and her writing became both a second career and a form of therapy and catharsis, a letting go of pent-up negative feelings. Her essays were collected together and formed the basis of her fascinating memoir, Lulu in Hollywood. Emboldened by this newfound appreciation and embracing the interest in her work at Louise Brooks festivals and retrospectives, she was able to stop drinking, more or less, for the first time since the age of 14. Amazingly, she said she had never seen any of her films until this point, and she still found them difficult to watch without the blur of alcohol. In 1978, she was interviewed by Kenneth Tynan for The New Yorker. By this time, she was virtually bedridden with arthritis and had barely left her apartment in 20 years. but she comes across as contented and unembittered, intelligent and with the same impish sense of fun that she managed to convey so infectiously in her films. When Tynan comments on the serious and worthy books on her shelf, she dismisses them with a casual,
"I'm probably one of the best read idiots in the world."
She shows him pictures of her friends and acquaintances from her flapper days and gleefully tells him that in the 1960s, Guido Crepax, an Italian graphic artist, started
a very sexy and tremendously popular comic strip about a girl who looked exactly like me as Lulu. Crepax wrote to thank me for the inspiration and said he regarded me as a 20th century myth. I appreciated the tribute and told him that at last I felt I could disintegrate happily in bed with my books, gin, cigarettes, coffee, bread, cheese, and apricot jam.
She reflects how over the years she suffered poverty and rejection, and then came to be
confined to a small apartment in the alien city of Rochester. Looking about, I saw millions of old people in my situation, wailing like lost puppies because they were alone and had no one to talk to. But they had become enslaved by habits which bound their lives to warm bodies that talked. I was free. Although my mother had ceased to be a warm body in 1944, she had not forsaken me. She comforts me with every book I read. Once again I am 5, leaning on her shoulder, learning the words as she reads aloud Alice in Wonderland.
It seems to me that this interview reveals that she's finally got over the not enough attention she didn't get from her mother, and has come to appreciate her as a person in her own right, able to enjoy the memories of the time they did spend together rather than dwell on what she didn't do. In her later years, Louise was very open about her mental health struggles, her bouts of depression and anxiety, and self-medication with alcohol. Her willingness to discuss her traumatic experiences and personal battles helped pave the way for future generations to be more open about their own challenges. Her relationships were often turbulent and marked by a pattern of instability and dysfunction, and she was in no doubt that childhood trauma had contributed to her difficulty in forming healthy attachments. But despite the problems she faced throughout her life, Louise remained resilient and maintained a strong sense of self. She passed away in 1985 at the age of 78, leaving behind a legacy that continues to captivate and inspire to this day. Her iconic look, of course, remains an influence. But I think she should also be remembered for her strength of character, her indomitable spirit, and her determination always to be true to herself, even if this did not always accord with the rules of polite society. Louise Brooks' legacy is not just one of a groundbreaking actress and an iconic figure of the film era, but also as a trailblazer for women wanting to be independent and follow their own paths, and as someone who brought attention to mental health issues long before it was fashionable to do so. By examining her life, we gain a deeper appreciation for her achievements, both on and off the screen, and a better understanding of the importance of mental health in our own lives. Thank you for joining me on this journey into the life of Louise Brooks. If you've enjoyed it, please give it a thumbs up and subscribe to my channel for more intriguing content. If you're interested in Louise Brooks, then her films are now out of copyright and are available on YouTube, and are definitely worth a watch. Also, her fascinating memoir, Lulu in Hollywood, is worth a read, and that's available through my Amazon store page. Don't forget to hit the notification bell to be kept up to date with all the latest releases. And apart from that, I'll say bye for now and look forward to seeing you again soon. Bye.